Hello everybody, welcome back to another REPL.it speedrun. Today I will be going from on the Python REPL.it 6.4 to 6.6 while loops. So our task here is, as a future athlete, you just started your practice for an upcoming event. On the first day you run X miles, and by the day of the event you should be able to run Y miles. Calculate the number of days required for you to finally reach the required distance for the event. If you increase your distance each day by 10% from the previous day, print one integer representing the number of days to reach the required distance. So for example, the first day you can run 10 miles and you should be able to run 30 miles by the event. That means you need 13 days with your distance increasing by 10% each day to be able to run 30 miles. So first, let's make two variables. Your miles and event miles. So this will track how many miles you can run, and the event miles will track how many miles you need to run for the event. So your miles currently is int input, which will be the first input. For example, 10. Then the event miles will be int input also, but this will get the second input, which is 30. Now we have to track the number of days you need to get from your miles to the event miles. So let's make a variable for that first. Days equals 0. So now we're going to go on to our while loop. Remember that a while loop is a repeating if statement. So while your event miles is bigger than your miles, then we should add 10% from the previous day to your miles. Yeah, so this right now tracks if the event miles is bigger than the miles that you can run. And inside this loop, we should be adding 10% of the miles that you ran from the previous day to the miles you can run. So your miles equals your plus equals. So this adds whatever's on this side and whatever's on your miles, and that would be the new variable here. So your miles divided by 10. So this adds 10% of the miles you ran the previous day to your miles, the variable. Now this here, it won't just work yet because currently we're not updating the amount of days we have to run. So after this, after we add 10% of the previous day's miles to our miles, then we add days plus equals 1. So this will add one more to the days counter. Now with everything here, we should be able to print the number of days and get our output. So let's try running it, and let's put the example inputs in, 10 and 30. So right now it's 12, and it should actually be 13. So the problem here is that our days here, we've set it to 0 at the start, and that shouldn't be 0 because it doesn't take, because the number of days should always be at 1. So now if we run this again, 10 and 30, we should get 13. Now if we submit this, everything should be right. And that's how you do 6.4, while loops jogging. Now on to 6.5, length of sequence. Given a sequence of non-negative integers, where each number is written in a separate line, determine the length of the sequence. The sequence ends with 0. Print the length of the sequence, not counting the 0. The number following the number 0 should be omitted. So for example, if we have our input as 1, 7, 9, 0, and 5, we should be printing 3 because there are 3 numbers before this 0 over here. So let's make a counter. This counter will, this variable here that I made will count the number of numbers before we reach a 0. And we can do that by establishing it in a while loop. So while the input is not equal to 0, so this checks if our input's not equal to 0. So 1 is not equal to 0, 7 is not equal to 0, 9 is not equal to 0, but 0 is equal to 0. And so if our input here doesn't equal 0, then this will happen. Count plus equals 1, which adds 1 to our count variable. Now we can just print count as we've already gotten in this while loop the number of numbers before the input reaches the number 0. So if we run this and we input 1, 7, 9, 0, it will output 3. Now notice that it didn't let me input 5, and that's because the code here already detected that the input is equal to 0. So now if we submit this, then it should be correct. And that's how you do 6.5 while length of sequence. Now on to 6.6. While loop, sum of sequence. Given a sequence of non-negative integers where each number is written in a separate line, the sequence ends with 0. Print the sum of the sequence. So, for example, this is very similar to the last question. For example, if we get 1, 7, and 9, the same as the last input, and it ends with a 0, then we should be getting the sum of these 3 numbers, which is 17. So instead of a count variable, let's make a total variable. So total equals 0. We will be using this to get the sum of the numbers before the input equals 0. So total equals 0. Now let's start our while loop. Actually, we have to make a variable for the input, and we will be updating that in our while loop. So n equals int input, total equals 0. So while n is not equal to 0, which checks if our input is not equal to 0, then we add total plus equals n. So this will add n to our total. Now this doesn't work just yet because n will be the same number over and over because it is not being updated. So let's update n after we add it to our total. So n equals int input. Now since our inputs are in all different lines, that means that the n we get, the first input would be 1. And if we update it here, the input will now be 7. And our while loop will loop. And if we input it here, and if we update our input again, it will be 9. So this keeps on happening until our input will equal 0. Now that we have that, we can just print the total of numbers. And if we get this input, oops, it should output 17. Now if we submit this, it should be correct. Thank you for joining me on a REPL.it speedrun from 6.4 to 6.6, and I hope to see you next time.